My name is Elizabeth Rains. I'm 48 years old. For nearly 3 decades, I served under the banner of the United States Strategic Security Forces. I coordinated covert operations that the average citizen might never hear about in their lifetime. I've sat in command centers thousands of miles from land, eyes scanning streams of encrypted data, my mind alert every minute to ensure the safety of millions. I've lived through life or death decisions, but the most painful betrayal didn't come from an enemy. It came from the very people I once called family. My parents, Ronald and Marion, along with my younger brother Jason and his wife Crystal, dragged me into Rockwell County Court as if I were some stranger running a scam. They called me a cold shadow, the child who abandoned her family chasing empty glory. I still remember my mother's eyes that morning, not worried or sad, but distant and cold, like I had never truly been part of her life. Jason held his head high like he was the hero of a story he made up. Crystal sighed theatrically, hands clenched, her eyes fake wet with tears. It nearly made me laugh if I still knew how to laugh back then. They didn't just want the house I helped pay off for almost 20 years, the place I quietly returned to for leave between deployments. They demanded all assets under my name. The investments funded by hazardous duty bonuses, every cent I earned from strategic speaking engagements after leaving the front lines. They wanted me erased from the Rains family inheritance, like I never existed. But that wasn't all. They hired a lawyer and launched heavy accusations, claiming I was mentally unstable, suffering from post-war stress disorder. They used that phrase like a weapon, an excuse to take everything. Crystal, with a sickeningly sweet voice, told the judge I had said disturbing things. Jason emphasized how I disappeared for years, ignoring our aging parents. I wore my old uniform to court, not for show, but to remind myself I was still a soldier. And in that uniform, I stood silently, listening to them talk about me like I was a stranger. They painted a whole new Elizabeth. Selfish, cold, pitiable. And trust me, they played their parts too well. But I didn't interrupt. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. Because I wasn't there to defend myself. I was there for something else. Something they didn't see coming. I let them perform. I let them feel confident. I let them think I had given up, collapsed, shattered under the weight of betrayal. Because I wasn't there to win with words, I was there to pull back the curtain. 3 days after the first court hearing, I received an email titled, Confirmation of Veteran Benefits Disbursement Program, Federal Reintegration Assistance Program. I'd seen stuff like that before, mostly scams. But this one looked official. Proper grammar, no typos, a sender address ending in gov. What made my skin crawl was the content. They were confirming a disbursement of more than $42,000 to an emergency assistance account, under my name, Elizabeth Rains. The problem was, I never applied for such a program. I reread the first line. We are sorry to hear about your current medical condition. The diagnosis of acute anxiety disorder has been confirmed via counseling records from Dr. Crystal R. Whitmore. Crystal. My fingers clenched the mouse until they turned white. Whitmore was her maiden name. Crystal. Jason's wife, my sister-in-law, the same woman who stood beside him in court trying to erase me from the will. I took a deep breath, logged into my encrypted personal computer and sent a single message to someone I only contacted in extreme emergencies. Tommy Sutherland, former financial crimes investigator with the Federal Asset Control Bureau, a man who owed me his life from Kandahar in 2004. He replied with just 2 words. Old line. 45 minutes later, I had access to all the federal benefits registered under my name, and a long list of loans, assets, health insurance accounts, even psychological records, all forged. At the same time, Tommy said something that made my entire body go cold. The house on Maplewood, it was transferred to a company called Ridgeview Partners LLC 3 months ago. Legal representative Jason Rains. I rose from my chair, hands trembling. That was the house I helped my parents buy almost 20 years ago. While I was deployed in Iraq, I sent money home, helping them chip away at debt. And now, my name had vanished from the deed. Jason had taken it all, with my parents' signatures. I didn't speak to anyone. I made no calls, raised no blame. I simply stayed silent and gathered everything. For the next 3 weeks, I moved like a shadow. By day, I slipped between the city library and a small copy shop on the corner like a middle-aged woman hunting for a new job. But at night, I returned to who I truly was, a former intelligence analysis officer. I traced every wire transfer, every tax ID, every patient name Crystal had used in her counseling records. It all pointed to one staggering truth. Crystal was running a completely fake veteran mental health counseling center. I cross-checked each patient listed. At least 6 had died in combat. 3 others were old friends. None had ever seen Crystal, and none even knew they were receiving treatment. Worse, I discovered that the company Jason was listed under, Ridgeview Partners LLC, didn't just hold my house deed. It owned a network of shell companies registered in Delaware, Panama, and Cyprus. This was no longer a family fraud, it was a full-scale international money laundering operation. By using veterans' identities to file fake medical records, they tapped into the Social Security system, claimed benefits, then laundered the funds through so-called non-profit organizations, most of which were managed by Jason. The money was cycled, legitimized, and funneled into offshore accounts. I had seen this kind of activity before, in classified reports from the Middle East, where intelligence agencies embedded operatives within charities to harvest sensitive data. One name kept appearing in the documents: Ortis Medical Foundation, an entity once suspected of ties to foreign intelligence operations, and the most recent listed collaborator of Ortis, none other than Crystal. I stared at my computer screen, eyes locked on a single line. Accessing priority records, clearance level 3, DOD Medlink. This record gave access to thousands of veterans' medical files, many of them former special ops personnel with highly classified information. I knew instantly this wasn't just financial crime. This was a covert intelligence gathering operation in disguise. I closed my laptop, my back drenched in cold sweat. If I was right, then Jason and Crystal weren't just greedy. They were links in a much deeper chain. And I was the only one close enough to see it. But if I kept going, I wouldn't just be going up against my family. I might be confronting forces I thought I'd left behind in distant war zones. I sat alone in the dark, the room lit only by the now blank screen. One thought rang clear in my mind. I don't act. More people will get caught in this. And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone else fall in silence. The leak spread faster than I expected. 1 week after I started tracking Crystal and Jason, a headline appeared on the front page of the Denver Sentinel. Former strategic security officer sued over family asset dispute, alleged signs of post-war mental instability. The photo they used was a 10-year-old image, me in uniform, face hardened after a 42-hour shift, making me look cold, even dangerous. The kind of image the public doesn't warm to. Less than 24 hours later, local news stations jumped in. A late-night talk show posed the question: is the military abandoning veterans struggling with psychological wounds? Below was a smaller subtitle: Elizabeth Reigns, from war hero to family feud over inheritance. I turned off the TV. Then I turned off my phone. People who had once been friends and teammates began to disappear. A few sent hesitant messages. I don't know if any of this is true, but if you need anything, let me know. Messages like that never have a follow-up. Calls from old colleagues stopped. Emails from the Veterans Network went silent. On the 10th day, I got a call from my former command office in D.C. Lieutenant Colonel Miller, a field buddy from Somalia, sounded unusually cold. We understand you're going through some family matters. Perhaps you should consider an indefinite leave until things are clearer. I didn't object, didn't ask for an explanation, didn't beg. I simply said, "Well, understood, sir," and hung up. That night, I sat alone in my sixth-floor apartment, window facing a quiet residential neighborhood. Below, the maple trees were shedding their leaves. Autumn had arrived. Everything was so still it felt as if the whole world was quietly pulling away from me. I pulled out the files Tommy had sent: property transfers, forged benefit claims, electronic signatures, a stack of loan applications, all under my name or my parents', Marion and Ronald Rains. At first, I thought they had been manipulated by Jason. But then I saw the loan agreement from Ridgeview Partners LLC bearing my mother's handwritten signature. Right above the line marked, "Guarantor of property asset. Date signed 2 weeks before last Christmas." The day I had just returned from the Colorado Springs base, still limping from a ligament injury, and that night my mother held me for a long time. She said, "I'm so glad you're home safe." But it turned out, while I was sitting in the living room reading the paper, she was signing away everything I had ever helped build. I stared at that document for a long time, until my eyes burned, though I couldn't tell if it was from exhaustion or from the tiny crack inside me that had just split a little wider. I used to believe the battlefield was the loneliest place, but it's not. Nothing is lonelier than being doubted, abandoned, and erased by your own family, as if you never truly belonged. I asked myself, had I ever truly been loved? Or were the hugs, the blessings, the "happy birthday to our dear daughter" cards just a cover, hiding the truth that I never really belonged to the place they called family? I didn't fight back. I didn't go to the press to clear things up. I didn't write letters to defend myself, because I knew if I spoke too soon, they would smear me faster. Instead, I resecured my computer systems, moved all data to an encrypted drive, and started working in silence. Just like I always had. I tracked financial activity from Crystal's accounts. Strange expenses for international business trips, hotels in Prague, and private medical services in Montenegro. None of it related to actual counseling work. I followed a chain of hidden transactions through 3 layers of accounts, and then one chilling name surfaced: Verilux Intelligence Consultants. A name I'd seen before in a classified report back when I worked at Central Command Intelligence. It was tied to a military data breach back in 2015. I placed my hand over my chest, my heartbeat slow but heavy. I was starting to understand. This was bigger than Jason, bigger than family greed. I was walking into a covert war, where the enemy wasn't on the other side of a battlefield, but sitting at my own table. And I understood one thing clearly: if I wasn't silent, I'd be swallowed whole. But if I did nothing, more people would be destroyed. I sat there all night. Outside, it began to rain. A soft, persistent rain, just like the way truth was slowly revealing itself. And I, Elizabeth Rains, made a decision. I would stay silent, but not to surrender. To prepare for my counterstrike. The day of the final hearing arrived. The Denver air was cutting cold. I stepped out of the vehicle in my traditional military dress uniform. Deep navy blue, unit medals on the lapel, commendation ribbons on my left chest faded with time. Not to impress anyone, but to remind myself of who I was, before they tried to strip that away once again. Across the courtroom, Jason sat with his legs crossed, hair neatly styled, fingers twirling his familiar gold pen, looking just as confident as the first time he invented the story that I was mentally unstable. Crystal sat beside him in a gray dress, clutching a file, her eyes darting toward me with a gaze full of pretended worry. My parents arrived a few minutes later. My mother, Marion, wore a plum-colored sweater, clutching her worn purse like it held all the memories she was desperate to preserve. My father, Ronald, remained the quiet man he always was, his eyes like stone. No one looked at me. No one greeted me. The plaintiff's lawyer began, voice clear, laced with skillful discrediting. Your Honor, my clients once loved Elizabeth as their own flesh and blood, but her recent behavior has exceeded all bounds. Assets were controlled, psychological pressure was placed on aging parents. Her post-war instability clearly influenced her actions. They presented images, news headlines, financial graphs, all laid out to construct an image of me as unstable and suspicious. I didn't interrupt, didn't defend. When it was my turn, I simply stood, walked slowly to the witness podium, and placed a navy blue file folder before the judge. It was clipped together by a single plain binder. Nothing on the cover except one bold line. Classified, submitted per federal security directive. I spoke softly. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I request that you review this document before issuing any conclusions. The judge, an older man with a slight stoop and thick reading glasses, opened the file. He flipped the first page, then the second. His hand movements slowed, his brow furrowed. The air in the room shifted. No one spoke. Not a single cough, only the sound of paper turning, and the silence stretching like a taut wire straining under pressure. After a while, he looked up. His gaze sharpened. Bailiffs, sail the courtroom. No one leaves. Jason shot to his feet, mouth agape. Crystal turned to my mother, panicked. I remained still, hands clasped calmly, eyes locked on the judge. And then they appeared. 4 federal agents in plain clothes entered the courtroom, moving quickly but with deliberate purpose. One approached Jason, another took hold of Crystal's hand. A third agent leaned in and whispered something into the judge's ear. He nodded and signaled. Jason Rains and Crystal Whitmore Rains, the judge announced. His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to slice through the tension in the room. You are hereby detained on charges of federal financial fraud, identity theft involving multiple members of the United States Armed Forces, and conspiracy to aid cyber espionage targeting national defense systems. Crystal screamed. No, this is a mistake. I'm just a mental health counselor. Jason flailed. I didn't do anything. This is her fabrication. She's jealous. The agent twisted his arm behind his back. The click of the handcuffs rang out. That metallic snap I'd heard before in war zones, but never inside a family courtroom. My parents stayed seated. No tears, not a single word. I looked at them one last time. My mother turned her face away. My father sat upright, staring blankly into the distance. I didn't know what I was hoping for in that moment. An apology? A nod? A flicker of regret? No. All I received was a silence so cold it cut deeper than any insult. The judge turned to me. Ms. Rains, the court acknowledges and forwards the submitted evidence to the Department of Homeland Security. Emergency measures for witness protection, especially for veterans whose personal data was exploited, are hereby approved. This session is now adjourned. I nodded, thanked him, then gathered the backed-up documents and walked out of the courtroom. A storm had just passed, but the consequences were only beginning. That afternoon, I returned to the old house on Lakeview Drive. The one where I grew up, ran through the front lawn at age 6, recited the Pledge of Allegiance by the second-floor window. The house hadn't changed much, only the feeling inside me was completely foreign. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want them preparing another lie. The door was unlocked. I stepped inside, my shoes echoing across the worn wooden floors. My parents were in the living room. My father, Ronald, sat upright, hands placed neatly on his knees. My mother, Marion, sat in the armchair by the window, the afternoon light catching the silver in her hair, pulled into a tight bun. No one stood, no one asked why I was there. I placed a thin folder on the coffee table and sat across from them. Inside were copies of the evidence I had submitted to the court, not the full set, but enough for them to understand that I knew everything. I started with a simple sentence. I want to hear the truth. From both of you. My mother pressed her lips together. My father exhaled a quiet breath. Jason and Crystal, I said slowly, never breaking eye contact. They couldn't have done this alone. They needed signatures. They needed consent. And you gave it to them. No one denied it, no one protested. I asked, why? Why did you let them deceive you? Why stay silent while I was dragged through the mud? Why watch as I was painted as mentally unstable? A long pause. Finally, my mother spoke. Her voice was hoarse, as if she had swallowed too many unspoken things. Elizabeth, you were always far away, always somewhere no one could reach. You came home with medals, with eyes that looked at people like they were tactical maps. But Jason? He was here. He was with us, even when he was wrong. My father added, his tone steady. Family isn't just about ideals, Liz. Sometimes you choose the child who stayed. I sat motionless, not in shock, but because some part of me had known that answer all along. I remembered the letters I sent from base camps that were never answered. The Christmases I came home while Jason talked about his new business ventures. The stiff hugs from my mother. The way my father looked away every time I mentioned the war. I used to think they didn't understand me, but now I knew they never wanted to. Jason was the easier choice, the son who was present, even if it meant showing up with failure, lies, or disgrace. And me? I was the uncomfortable reminder that they had a daughter they could neither control nor mold. I asked one final question, though I already knew the answer. Did you ever think I was part of this family too? My mother shed a single tear, not out of remorse, but because she was being forced to face something she had spent a lifetime avoiding. Of course, she whispered, but you always felt like someone who didn't belong here. My heart didn't ache, it just felt hollow. I stood up and picked up the folder from the table, my eyes still locked on theirs. Family isn't about blood. It's not the names in a registry or the pictures on the wall or the titles written into a will. I paused, then spoke clearly. Family is a choice, and I wasn't the one who stopped choosing. No one responded. My mother looked down. My father looked away. I walked out of the house that was once called home. I didn't look back. I didn't carry sorrow with me. Only one truth settled clearly in my chest. I had been excluded from this family long ago. Not because of money, not because of status, but because they never accepted me. A daughter who refused to stay silent, who refused to pretend. Driving back to my small apartment, I felt no resentment, just an odd sense of peace. As if I had finally removed an invisible mask I'd worn since childhood. The mask of a child trying to please a family that never truly wanted her. I was no longer the daughter needing their approval. I was Elizabeth Rains. And I had just chosen my family by walking away. I knew the story wouldn't end in the courtroom, but I didn't expect it to spread like a national media storm. Within less than 2 days after the court ordered the arrests of Jason and Crystal, my name was everywhere. On all the major news outlets, CNN, NBC, USA Today, all ran headlines like, "Former security officer exposes family fraud network." Below were images clipped from the trial. Me in uniform, eyes straight ahead, Jason in handcuffs being pulled from his seat. Crystal crying, mascara streaking down her face. People shared the courtroom video on social media at lightning speed. Some accounts used hashtags. Elizabeth Rains, brave daughter, truth above all. But there were also other voices. Humiliating your parents on national TV? Nothing to be proud of. This woman clearly doesn't understand the meaning of family. I became a symbol of two opposing forces, a new kind of battle, where the enemy had no clear face. One side called me a hero, a woman who stood for truth, unshaken by blood ties, unyielding to corruption. They sent emails, handwritten letters, even left flowers at my doorstep. One veteran who had served in Kuwait wrote, "You did what many of us couldn't. Thank you for not letting them keep hurting people like me." But the other side hit just as hard. Late-night talk show brought in a family psychologist to dissect my actions. The man, in a crisp suit, gray hair, steady tone, told millions of viewers, "When children accuse their parents, even for valid reasons, we must ask, why wasn't this handled privately? Did it really need to go public? And were the motives entirely pure?" I sat alone in my living room, the TV on mute, watching the subtitles crawl across the screen, feeling a sting in my chest. Motives? What did they think I wanted? Fame? Money? Attention? If they only knew the nights I curled into myself in the dark, wondering if I had just lost everything by daring to speak the truth, maybe they wouldn't judge so quickly. And then there were my parents. Though not prosecuted due to age and health, the media hounded them. One news channel aired footage of my mother walking out of a grocery store, her face tense, her steps shaky, with the headline, "Parents of Family Traitor, Silent or Complicit." I didn't publicly defend them, but I also never wanted them thrown to the wolves like that. People started digging into our past. Who went to what school? Who attended whose graduation? Who spoke at which veterans event? Every minor detail of my private life was picked apart like a serialized drama. I got an email from an old friend, Vanessa, someone I was close to in college but had drifted apart from. She wrote, "I don't know what's true or what's not anymore, but I do know one thing. You were never the kind of person to do something wrong for selfish gain. I believe in you." Reading it, I cried. Not for the support, but for what it reminded me of. There was a time I believed in unconditional relationships, ones that didn't need explanations. But now, everything seemed to have an expiration date. And I started to realize it wasn't the truth that scared people. It was when that truth came from places they didn't want to confront, at the dinner table, in familiar faces. I wore sunglasses and a baseball cap when I went shopping. At the coffee shop, the barista looked at me with open curiosity. Some smiled in silent sympathy. Others avoided eye contact like they didn't want to be involved. One time, I walked into the library and overheard a group of middle-aged women whispering, "That's her, the one who sued her own brother." I learned to walk quietly. No need to respond, no need to explain. Because truth doesn't need applause to exist. It only needs to be spoken at the right time. And I had done that. I used to think victory would feel like triumph, like crossing the finish line after a long march. But it didn't. After the trial, after the media storm, after my name was attached to every kind of praise and criticism, there was only emptiness. No more mission, no more family, no more familiar ground. I could have stayed silent, lived the rest of my life in quiet, like so many who served, and then stepped away from the spotlight. But one thing wouldn't let me turn away. I wasn't the only one betrayed in silence. Numbers don't lie. While investigating Jason and Crystal, I found over 60 veteran identity files that had been misused. Some belonged to the deceased. Others to people still alive but battling PTSD, illness, and crushing debt. Those people had no voice. And I had once been one of them. So I decided to do what I needed most for myself. Build a safe space for those left behind. Called the organization Valor Point Foundation, because I wanted to make one thing clear. Courage doesn't end when you leave the battlefield. Courage is standing up again after the people closest to you push you down. I started small. Rented a room on the 3rd floor of an old office building in suburban Aurora. It had 2 wooden desks, 3 swivel chairs, and a whiteboard that wobbled on weak legs. The first person I called was Linda Carver, a former medical HR officer who lost her pension savings after falling for a fake consulting group. Linda showed up in a wrinkled blazer, short silver hair, eyes still wary. But when I explained the plan, legal support, identity protection, connecting with the VA and trauma recovery groups, she nodded without hesitation. I don't have much, Linda said. But I can read a file faster than any software out there. 3 months in, we had 5 people. 6 months, we gained a volunteer lawyer, an IT tech, and a trauma therapist who specialized in veterans. We didn't chant slogans. We didn't film flashy campaigns. We just did the work. Restoring names, clearing false debts, correcting medical records, helping people file claims properly. Some days I spent hours at a screen helping a veteran in Oregon reclaim a stolen identity he didn't even know was gone for 3 years. Other days I held a widow's hand and explained that her husband's benefits weren't gone, just misplaced, and we'd get them back. I didn't expect thank yous. But then, one Thursday, I received a handwritten envelope. No postmark, no return address. Opened it. Inside was a small note written in careful, slanted handwriting. You don't know me, but because of your foundation, my mom didn't lose everything. She can pay for her treatment now, and I don't cry in secret when she coughs. I thought the world was only lies. Until I saw your name. Thank you for not giving up. I read it 3 times. No name. Didn't need one. I placed the note in the drawer next to my 2010 service medal. Something I had once been proud of, but that never brought me as much peace as that letter. That night, I didn't lie awake. I sat out on the porch with a cup of hot tea, watching the city lights flicker under a deep violet sky. And for the first time in months, I smiled. Not a smile of triumph, but the smile of someone who had just rediscovered their purpose. I realized I can't heal the whole world, but I can help one person, then another, and another. I don't need applause. I don't need anyone to remember my name. Because healing sometimes begins with the quietest things. One late afternoon, I stood alone on the shore of Cannon Beach in Oregon. The breeze was gentle, the waves lapped steadily at my feet, cool but not biting. In the distance, the blazing red sun was slowly dipping beneath the horizon, leaving a streak of orange across the sea, like the final brushstroke of a silent painting. I took off my old military boots and let my bare feet touch the sand. For the first time in years, I let myself truly feel each step, not the firm stride of a soldier, but the gentle walk of someone who had survived. No more judgment, no more courts, no more spotlights or suspicious stares. Just me and the waves. I closed my eyes gently and took a deep breath. In that moment, I was no longer the woman who exposed her family's fraud. Not a hero, not a traitor. I wasn't Lieutenant Rains, nor Jason's sister, nor the daughter of Ronald and Marion. I was simply Elizabeth, a human being. Someone who had been broken, abandoned, misunderstood, and now was still standing. I remembered every face I had met since founding the Valor Point Foundation. Veterans who once believed they were invisible. Widows clutching confusing paperwork, unsure where to begin. Young soldiers recently discharged, scared, lost, and the tears of gratitude when they finally reclaimed their names, their benefits, their dignity. There were no reporters documenting that moment. No medal ceremonies, no banners, no applause. Just one thing left behind, the quiet belief that I had done the right thing. I used to think victory meant bringing the guilty to light. That truth had to be celebrated to matter. But now I understand. True victory doesn't need a cheer or a medal. It happens when you look back and feel no bitterness. I forgave, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I moved beyond the betrayal without letting it turn me cruel. I continued living, not out of anger, but out of compassion and quiet strength. I bent down, picked up a small stone from the shore, smooth, cold and solid, just like I used to be. Then I let it go into the water, letting it drift away, without regret. There are battles without gunfire, no enemies in uniform, no tactical maps or retreat orders. They happen within us, every day, every hour. And it is the choice to remain ethical, to stay true to what's right, that marks the true victor. When I turned away from the ocean, the sun had fully set. Only a faint glow remained on the horizon. I walked slowly, hands in my jacket pockets, a small smile on my lips. No one waited for me at the end of the path. No arms opened wide to welcome me. But I didn't feel alone, because I had learned something deeper than any training in the military. Sometimes, silence is the loudest kind of victory. I don't need to shout to prove I was right. I don't need everyone to understand. I just need to keep living, keep helping with a whole heart and steady hands. One person, one step, one small act. And that, more than a legal win, more than media attention, more than public opinion, that is the greatest reward I will carry for the rest of my life. Elizabeth Rains, age 45. Veteran. Survivor. Healer. The one who walked through the darkness. In silence. The story of Elizabeth Rains is a powerful reminder that not all battles involve gunfire, and not all enemies come from outside. In a world where truth is often clouded by blood ties and reputation, the greatest courage is to stand up, even when standing alone. Elizabeth chose truth over silence, justice over compromise, and the peace she found in the end, quiet, uncelebrated, and free of noise, was the most worthy victory of her life. And maybe of ours, too. What do you think about Elizabeth's journey? Would you have the courage to choose truth if it meant going against your own family? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt stories about family and life.